Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.
Welcome to the Human Performance Outliers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Bitter, and I look forward to exploring a variety of topics around health and fitness. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast listening platform and YouTube. You can now also check out the full video episode on X. Please also consider sharing your favorite episodes and leaving a review. If you tag me or send me a screenshot, I will enter you in a monthly raffle for a free consultation with me. For full episode details, including notes, timestamps, transcripts, and ways to support the show, please head over to my website at zachbitter.com. There you can find all my coaching services, including some of my new offerings for 2025. If you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website or at hpopodcast@gmail.com. Finally, a big thanks to Element Electrolytes and Delta G Ketones for supporting the podcast. A full description of how I use these products can be found at the end of the episode. Discounts, promotions, and details can also be found in the show notes. All right, everyone, this is going to be another shorter episode, solo by myself, that I'm going to be doing more of this year. And this one's just going to be a little bit of a training recap or training journal that I'm going to be doing over the course of the year. And the way I'm going to break these down is I'm going to go through what I would consider kind of like a training block, which usually tends to be about 3 weeks for me. That can adjust a little bit based on kind of how my body's responding to the training. And I'm going to do a short episode after each of those and just kind of recap what I've been doing, why I'm doing it, and kind of where I'm at based on my targets. So for this year, I'm planning on heading back to the Pettit Center in June to do 100 miles, 12 hours on the track at the Olympic training facility there. And I'm kind of structuring stuff around that. So I'll do a fair bit of other racing between now and then as well, mostly probably local to Texas, that I'll sprinkle in as I'm looking to kind of just get some long runs and some data points as to where I'm at, kind of more in race day settings and things like that. But the kind of peaking goal will be the Pettit Center there in June. So for a little bit of background, I kind of kicked off the year basically coming off a fairly extended offseason for me, where I spent about 6 weeks to end the year where I was doing either no running for a little bit of time, I think it was maybe a couple weeks, to just running, but doing it in a much less structured manner where it was kind of a secondary input, with the primary input being just a focus on strength work. So kicking off the year, I sort of flipped that around where I started making the running training input the primary thing, and then I'm still doing strength work, as you'll see when I kind of report on this, as a secondary kind of input, the support structure for the running build here. So I'm really interested to kind of get things going on this training block or this training cycle, I should say, because for one, I think I came into it quite a bit stronger than I have in the past due to that kind of strength work focus for a while there. And I'm also pretty far behind where I would normally be with speed work. And some of that is just from, one, not doing it, and two, I'd had a bit of a hamstring issue that I was dealing with at the end of last year's kind of racing that kind of kept me from doing speed work and really testing some of those paces, even with the running I was doing. So the strength focus wasn't necessarily going to make me a whole lot faster for like short and long intervals directly, but hopefully with that kind of structure in place, or that foundation in place, as I kind of expose my body to those stimuluses in the coming weeks, I'll see kind of some of the paces of speed workouts kind of start to come back to where they were in the past, and get myself in a spot where my fitness is where I want it to be for racing. So just to kind of kick this one off, if you want kind of a more of an overview of just my training philosophy in general, I've done a full series of episodes, with kind of the anchor point episode being this one called Endurance Training Simplified. I link to all of the episodes, a page that has all of those episodes on it. So if you want to deep dive into that link is in the show notes. Where things maybe will deviate a little bit from just kind of the structure of that will be the fact that I'm reporting on myself as an individual here. So the one thing I really like to think about is, once you kind of think of things through the lens of what are the important inputs for a well-structured endurance training plan, and then what are going to be things that you need to do first, like what's the order of operations, which for me personally, I think are best built off of the race intensity. And then you do things that are going to be maybe weaknesses, important, but less specific to race intensity. And then you just get more specific as you get closer to the race. So that race distance and intensity is going to be a really big guide as to kind of how you order those different things inside of it. For me, since I've been through a couple decades essentially of training at this point, the way I look at it is get a gauge of where what I'll call like my global fitness is, and think of it through, okay, there are going to be workouts that are less specific and more specific that I want to generally be kind of mindful of, but I also want to make sure that I am really targeting the areas of the biggest weakness or the areas that could stand to develop more versus just continuing to hammer things that are either already there or close to there where there's like a smaller margin of improvement. So for me right now, that is Speedwork. That is definitely Speedwork. My pace at kind of the lower intensity stuff, what I would consider like the easy category, which could be kind of zone 1 and zone 2 type stuff, it's not where I want it to be ultimately, but it's not far off. My pace at things like short intervals and long intervals and my ability to sustain like higher volumes of that's way further from where I want it to be, relatively speaking. So what that tells me is I want to get to a point where I can really kind of pull that lever consistently so I can see those adaptations take place. Now, with this particular training block, I had the added thing to consider, which is I was coming off of that hamstring issue. So for me to just like hop on the track and start ripping it, probably not a good idea in terms of making sure I get that back to 100% or that's at 100% and stays there, so I don't have something that's going to just really disrupt consistency and ultimately kind of set timelines back and things like that. So despite that being kind of my biggest need, I did very little of it in this first 3 weeks and sort of just tried to renormalize just a fairly consistent amount of volume during those 3 weeks. And use a couple sessions or actually a few sessions and then kind of test that hamstring just enough to know if it was kind of ready so that with the next training block, I could jump in and just kind of do a little more structured, a little more detailed, a little more high volume versions of that. So I did have a few sessions in here, 1 per week essentially, where I would test some stuff. I would do some strides at the end of some of the easier runs and base runs and things like that. But generally speaking, those were very small percentage of my total work volume for these 3 weeks. So for those curious, my kind of targets heading in were to try to get around maybe 10 hours of running per week, which came out to week 1 being 83 miles, week 1 was 80 miles, week 2 was 83 miles, and week 3 was 88 miles. So it's kind of right in that distance that would kind of be that time frame. For those curious, it was like 9 hours and 56 minutes, 10 hours 51 minutes, and 11 hours to be exact with that. The way I kind of spread that out was week 1, I just did all solos, so 7 runs, no doubles or anything like that. And that I think was just something I wanted to kind of do just because for one, I probably didn't need doubles to get to the volume I was hitting for that week. And also, while I was waiting for my body to respond, I did want to give myself that kind of full 24 hours essentially between training sessions to kind of reset and also give myself a little bit of space to kind of keep some strength work in there because I don't want to just totally dispatch strength work. I want to make sure that that's still kind of in the program, maybe more so as a maintenance now versus trying to really develop that, but I don't want to just like lose that altogether. So, that week also included a couple lower body sessions and some upper body core sessions as well. The second week, I actually did try to tease a little more two-a-days just to kind of see how my body was feeling running in the afternoon versus just running purely in the morning, which is when I would normally put some runs in. So I did actually 10 runs that week where I did 3 in the afternoon. They were just really easy, really slow, kind of just shakeout runs essentially, and had those in there to just kind of supplement the volume and just kind of get a feel for what I ultimately will want the structure to look like when I kind of get into full steam. Week 3, I kind of had I had the same general approach going into the week as week 2, where I'd have some doubles, but what ended up happening is I ended up feeling pretty good in the AM runs. So I ended up just stretching a few of those out to the degree where I didn't really need to or want to add any more additional volume to that week by doing doubles. So I ended up just with one of them. I had 8 runs that week with one double in there. And the nice thing was the double I did on week 3 was way higher quality in the sense that I was moving faster, felt a little more like natural to kind of move up into maybe a little bit closer to kind of a zone 2 versus just zone 1, and kind of spin the legs a little faster than I would normally do on a second run. For the Speedwork sessions that I did in those 3 weeks, I started off pretty basic. I did a 20 by 30 seconds for the first one, where I just did 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Intensity was kind of moderate high is where I would put it. It wasn't like pushing to that point where I would feel like, all right, this is definitely a real solid VO2 max intensity. It's sitting just underneath that. Week 2, I just sort of extended the duration but kept the same amount of volume. I did 10 by 60 seconds, same sort of like target intensity. And then week 3, I just replicated that workout with another 10 by 60 seconds. And both of those were 60 seconds on, 60 seconds off for the sort of structure of that. And I did notice that I was getting faster over those 3 weeks in terms of how quick I was, or how much distance, I guess, or what pace I was hitting during those. Still quite a bit off from where I want to be, but I was seeing some of improvements there. And, most of that was probably just kind of getting my body used to going through those paces again versus any real adaptations taking place at this point in time. I may see some benefit from those sessions from a Speedwork standpoint in the future, but there likely weren't something where like, oh, on week 2, I ran this pace. Week 3, I was maybe moving 10, 15 seconds per mile faster for those intervals. It's unlikely that I just actually got faster from a real physiological adaptation standpoint in that time frame. But hopefully that will pay forward, or at least serve as a bit of a primer to what I want to do in this next training block from a Speedwork standpoint. So in terms of what I ended up doing with the strength work, I was pretty focused on kind of for lower body, making sure I was doing some kind of pulling exercises off the ground, which I usually lean on like the hex bar for. I'd like to do some version of like a hamstring curl to kind of supplement with that. I'll also do some kind of weighted hip thruster type stuff in the rotation, and then some weighted kickbacks. And then I'll mix in things like some box steps, lunges, Bulgarian split squats, and things like that. And then the upper body and core is pretty basic. Core's a lot of planks, hanging leg raises, cable twists. Upper body's also pretty basic. I'll do some pulling stuff and then also do some sort of pushing type movement. So I'm looking to do some activities that kind of go in all those directions with that, and sprinkling that stuff in a couple times a week has kind of been the framework for these first 3 weeks. So that's what I got for this kind of brief little training recap. If you're interested in kind of more details on the day-to-day, I have been publishing my training journal where I post all my training details and some brief recaps on all of them on my Substack. So if you want to subscribe to that, you'll get an email every Monday morning, essentially, that kind of highlights that week, what I did, what I thought about it, where I maybe am going to make some adjustments and things like that if you're curious to kind of like get inside my head a little bit in terms of how I'm thinking about these things on the day-to-day. Thanks for sticking around to listen to how I use the show sponsors. Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte supplement based on my electrolyte loss rate of 614 milligrams per liter. I begin my day with half a packet of one of their hot beverage flavors with my morning coffee. When training, I will have a full packet of watermelon later in the day, typically before an afternoon training session or sauna visit. The reason I like Element is because they boast 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium in each one of their single-serve packets. If you are curious about how to dial in your own fluid and electrolyte setup, check out my episode 300 of this podcast. Delta G ketones is the best researched exogenous ketone supplement on the market. The research on exogenous ketones is constantly evolving. Delta G is responsible for much of it, boasting 50 plus published studies and 20 plus ongoing studies, and received DARPA grants designed for special forces. The best use case, as the evidence currently stands, is as a post-workout supplement for better recovery and or during longer intensity sessions to help with mental focus. For this reason, I will have a bottle of Delta G Performance, that's the little blue bottle, after my biggest workouts for the week and during long run training sessions. If you want to check out either Element Electrolytes or Delta G Ketones, you can check out a free sample pack of the key flavors of Element by heading to drinklmnt.com/HPO and get 20% off your next order of Delta G Ketones at deltagketones.com with promo code BITTER20.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.